Hi, everybody. Happy 2019. Hopefully, everybody's getting back into the swing of things slowly, if not quickly. But I starting with this screen helps support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Lana K. Or if you'd rather use a one-time donation via PayPal, use the address for PayPal in the description box below. I started with this because starting 2019 with a picture of Louis C.K. and a story mocking Parkland students during a set earlier in December at a New York comedy club is not the most festive way to ring in the new year. But I find this particular thing very interesting, and I chose to use the CBC article because it was one of the less histrionic ones. By the way, sorry if the volume's a bit quiet on my microphone. There are still people sleeping in the house, so I'm trying to be courteous. But yeah, some of the other articles about this have been very outraged. And I didn't want to start off on that foot. I wanted an article that was just the facts, not a hot take. And what happened was he made fun of the Parkland survivors, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School survivors, in a pretty spectacular fashion. This is in a sound-only recording that was posted on YouTube. It apparently happened December 16th. It was taken down, but media outlets found captured clips and transcripts of the whole thing. But the joke in question that caused the firestorm was a comment about the Parkland kids saying, "You're not interesting because you went to a high school where kids got shot. Why does that mean I have to listen to you? Why does that make you interesting? You didn't get shot. You pushed some fat kid in the way, and now I got to listen to you talking." Well, one of the Parkland parents responded on Twitter saying, "My daughter was killed in the Parkland shooting. My son ran from the bullets. My wife and I deal with loss every day. Why don't you come to my house and try out your new pathetic jokes?" There's been no further comment at this time, but obviously this is happening in the backdrop of Louis C.K. taking allegedly the statements here. He said he was, after spending a long and lucky career talking and saying anything I want, I will now step back and take a long time to listen. Now, that was when? November 10th, 2017. So it has been just over a year. Jury's out about whether that is a sufficiently long time to listen, because he's certainly offering opinions again. And I want to talk about this because it is comedy. And because this brings up questions of what is appropriate to say in humor. I admit that the clip, that the bit of the article lacks some context. I think it's really important what the setup to that audio was. I read other articles that claimed he also made fun of trans people, which, do so at your own peril. It is pretty, from a technical standpoint, it is pretty hackneyed material. The idea that these survivors were cowards who pushed fat kids out of the way to take bullets, like, that's not what happened. And yes, comedians take some creative license. It was insensitive. And this is one of these really difficult things with comedy, is one person's edgy comedy is another person's horribly offensive and cruel comedy. And for some odd reason, for a long time, people saw Louis C.K. or Louis C.K., I don't know how his name's pronounced, as some kind of smart comic in the vein of like a, oh God, I'm blanking on his name now. 7 words you can't say on television. George Carlin. There we go. Um, and I never found his material to be terribly smart. I found his material to be quite blunt instrument and not terribly clever. A lot of comedians pad their act with not terribly clever comedy because they can get nervous laughter, if nothing else. So that's nothing new. But I admit I never quite understood the appeal of his stuff. I tried to watch it. I tried to listen to it. George Carlin, he is not. George Carlin took real risks in offending for cause. He had certain philosophies that weren't just, I get to say anything I want. He actually had a thoughtfulness, and when he raged, when he ranted, there was a point to it. You know, people didn't always agree with his point, but I thought that he examined the arbitrary nature of offense in a way that was completely appropriate for comedy. Now, we get into this question of whether it's okay to mock children in a comedy set. And I had an experience when I was a teenager. I was 17 years old, and I had just been dumped by this guy who somehow ended up at a comedy club. The comedian on stage somehow got my ex-boyfriend's cell phone, called me, and started referencing details of our almost previously ended relationship from a comedy club stage, and I could hear the people laughing in the background. And I was at home. I was not at the club. I was not a willing participant in this. And I remember saying, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Slamming the phone down. And then I got in trouble from my mother for swearing in front of her guests. There was a follow-up from the comedy club. They did not offer any sort of apology. They did not seem to see the problem with involving people who did not pay to attend and therefore weren't in on the joke. I don't know why they thought a 17-year-old girl crying was funny, but I asked him tearfully, "Why are you doing this? What the fuck is wrong with you?" And I could hear people laughing in the background. And that's comedy for some people. Apparently, this guy was an American comic who did this all the time, and no one else had a problem with it. And he didn't apologize personally. The club assured me he felt quite badly about it and offered me and my mother free tickets to come down, like I was going to come down to a comedy club that wasn't being accountable. Ironically, years later, I ended up working sets at that very same comedy club, and I don't know if they remembered me, but everybody just said nothing. And so that's my sort of personal experience with this stuff, and how painful being the butt of these sorts of jokes when adult comedians are using the personal tragedies of teenagers to get laughs. It is a really complicated thing. Teenagers are not equipped the same way a full-blown adult is to weather those things. Teenagers' senses of self are still forming, and that kind of stuff can be extremely traumatic for a teenager. And I'm not comparing what happened to me to the Parkland kids. I can compare the, stabbings and injuries and sometimes even shootings. They didn't happen on school property, but kids in the community got shot where I grew up. It does traumatize the entire population of that school when something happens. I mean, when one kid gets harmed that way, when one kid gets violently injured, it takes away the sense of safety from the entire school, and it becomes a real public health challenge. And I found it really surprising the way certain public figures have just been so put off by these kids who have chosen to turn their tragedy into activism, which youth have done as long as there have been youth in the modern age. That's not strange either. But the particular venom with which the Parkland students have been handled, I find really interesting. And I think, quite frankly, that has contributed to their outsized power, their outsized moral authority on this issue. And so to answer the question that Louis C.K. says, insisting, like, why does this mean I have to listen to you? You're not interesting because you went to a high school where kids got shot. Well, that's actually not true. What's interesting about these kids is that they can speak so eloquently about the experience of having a mass shooter in their high school. People don't tend to respond to statistics, the average person. I know you guys are super systemized analytical thinkers. You're different. I'm acknowledging that. The average person does not respond to statistics very well. They need narratives. They need stories. And that's where these kids come in. The idea that kids are being given clear backpacks to take to school as some sort of safety measure instead of having I won't even say reasonable debate, any real debate about gun control in America is just it just seems so absurdist in a dark way. And like, why are these kids interesting? Why should you listen to them? They didn't get shot. Well, what if they did? Would that make them interesting just because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time? Like, it's bad to deconstruct jokes this way. No joke can withhold. But this isn't really a joke. This is a statement. Like, he tried to pad it with comedy by the idea of push some fat kid out of the way, which again didn't happen. I don't know why he felt the need to do that, but it really doesn't matter. Offensive comedy is protected speech. And there are comics every day telling equally offensive jokes. I've heard ones that are a lot funnier than this one. Sometimes they can work. Some people just have a gift for this sort of thing without seeming mean. I don't quite know how they do it. It's certainly not my gift. But I think the issue here is not that Louis C.K. told an offensive joke. I think the issue is that he tried to salvage his career by going, I'm going to take a long time to listen. And just over a year later, comes back mocking teenagers who are traumatized. So the listening seemed to take about as well as Mark Zuckerberg's listening tour, which is not at all. And I once again, I think that places like Vulture and Vox and The Guardian and all that stuff really miss the point here. It's not whether Louis C.K. is an abuser, or it's not whether he was offensive. Yes, he was offensive. He knew he was being offensive. He was deliberately offensive. That's not the point. The point is that he violated his brand via sexual misconduct. And then he tried to pivot his brand by going, I'm so sorry, this is all on me, I'm going to take a long time to listen. And then he violated that potentially career salvaging deal with the public by, lobbing low blows at youth. And I think that, if he was making fun of adults, there would be less visceral reaction of, come on, man. He still seems to have this desire to go low. And I think people can't see that as harmless anymore because he admitted to, being completely inappropriate sexually with people. And I think that his management, who were the ones really covering it up, are more responsible for the damage caused to those women than him himself. Louis C.K. obviously has a lot of problems. Somebody doesn't just start masturbating in front of, unsuspecting women unless you have issues. But the way his brain goes in places, and unfortunately I think this is what some people find entertaining, the dark twists his brain takes on things. Happy people don't do that. Happy people don't imagine photogenic teenagers pushing fat kids in harm's way. Like, he lives Lord of the Flies in his brain. It's really odd and kind of disturbing and not at all funny that he would make up something like that. That's not what happened. And I think that's why the joke bombed. I think that's why it didn't work. I think there are ways of analyzing the whole Parkland phenomenon through comedy that could still, set people's teeth on edge, but not seem quite so, what is wrong with you? And I think that's the thing that Louis C.K. is suffering from right now. There were a lot of people I know that really wanted him to mount a comeback because he was involved in producing other people's work a lot. He got projects greenlit. He really knew how to work the system, and a lot of people's careers benefited through association with him. So I know there are people who very much were in his corner wanting him to come back. And, he may just have been trying out material that somebody recorded and put on the internet so he could be publicly shamed. Again, I'm not sure about context, but this is the reality of the world we live in. This is what we have to be prepared for as anybody who does anything involving humor professionally. Cell phones are real. Cameras are real. Recording devices are real. And you're not performing just for the people who paid to come into that room anymore. Anybody can record your set and put it on the internet. And you have to be prepared to be publicly responsible for what you say. And that, I don't believe, should mean that people just avoid offensive comedy completely. I think it's just have a point. Like, if we take, to me, and again, I don't know context, but this sounds again like Louis C.K.'s self-loathing bubbling up, right? Like, why am I interesting? Why does anybody care what I have to say? Why should anyone listen to me? I think the thing with masturbating in front of female comics shown that he actually is quite an unhappy person. A lot of his darkness is reflected in himself, and a lot of immature people do this. They make everything about them, and like, well, if his voice isn't relevant, then why are these kids relevant? Like, what? Why are you interesting? I think most people see the inherent interest in the perspective of a Parkland kid. I think the reason they are so offensive to some people is that they didn't just shut up and be proper victims. I think that what they have chosen to do and the effectiveness that they have had and the way they kind of organized and engaged with systems, I think is extremely interesting because youth political participation is notoriously low. They are outliers in that regard. They are getting involved, right or wrong, agree with what they're saying or not. Public participation among youth is good because we need more of it. You can't get youth issues represented in government if youth voter turnout is still freaking pathetic. That's why they're interesting. And don't get me wrong, I know he was just trying to be glib. He was trying to take on that persona of the white guy who doesn't give a fuck about anything. That's been done to death. And a guy of his caliber, a guy who has reached the level of success that he has, doesn't need to do that anymore. He's got enough money that he'd never have to work again for the rest of his life. He doesn't have to do those easy jokes. A lot of stand-ups, once they start making real money, continue to do stand-up just for the love of it. Jerry Seinfeld is one. Jay Leno still does clubs. He did clubs the entire time he did The Tonight Show, which, my God, I don't know why, but actually I do know why. You want to keep certain skills sharp. But this is just... even in a comedy club, I don't know. I don't think, and some people go there precisely because you shouldn't go there. I get that. I just think, and it's not even, he has no right to have an opinion on this because he masturbated in front of women. I'm not saying that either. I'm saying that there's a meanness to the joke. The idea that these kids were cowards who sacrificed other people to save their own skins says a lot more about Louis C.K. than it does about the Parkland kids. And I'm sure some people found it funny. Comedy is extremely subjective. That's not the issue here. The issue here is that he said, like, look at his statement. He said, the hardest regret to live with is what you've done to hurt someone else. And I can hardly wrap my head around the scope of hurt I brought on them. I'd be remiss to exclude the hurt that I've brought on people who I work with and have worked with, whose professional and personal lives have been impacted by this, and talks about all the projects. I've brought pain to my family, my friends, my children, and their mother. I've spent a long and lucky career talking and saying anything I want. I will now step back and take a long time to listen. Well, he clearly hurt the parent, at least one set of parents from Parkland. And I think the big question remaining from this whole controversy is, does he care that he hurt people now? And I'll leave it there. Food for thought, right? Thanks for watching.